I'll call the Newport Beach City Council study session for June 23rd, 2009 to order. May we have the roll call, please?
The record will reflect that Councilmember Rosansky is absent.
Okay. First item is clarification of items on the consent calendar. Councilwoman Daigle? Councilwoman Gardner?
Number 10. I'll get the right one. This lays out very clearly all the things that we're trying to accomplish in the Bay. But what it doesn't tell me is why we are renewing this. It doesn't tell me anything about the results we've gotten from this company. So looking at this, I don't know whether we got all that money finally because we got some open doors because of these people or whatever. So perhaps this evening we could have a little bit of comment on that.
Okay. Councilman Webb?
I have none.
Councilman Henn?
None.
Mayor Pro Tem Curry?
No items?
Okay. And I have none. Okay. Our first discussion item is the ICO Building Code Effectiveness Grading for Newport Beach.
Mr. Mayor, before Jay Albatar gives a very brief presentation, I just wanted to say that as far as I'm concerned, I think this is the last time we'll be meeting at 3 o'clock as far as our study session is concerned. You know, we have been meeting at 3 in order to make sure that we had enough time to talk about the budget and afford us the time that City Council needs in closed session. But I think after the budget is adopted that we'll be looking at going back maybe at 3:30 to 4 o'clock as far as study sessions are concerned. So that is the good news I bring, and then I turned it over to Jay Albatar to talk about some other good news.
Thank you, Mr. Bludow. Mayor Selich, members of council, I have a PowerPoint presentation to explain what ISO is and what type of award we received by this organization. ISO stands for Insurance Service Office, and basically they're an organization that provide a service to the property and casualty insurance companies through independent surveys of building departments throughout the country. And they do that periodically to basically assess the building department's effectiveness in application and enforcement of the building codes, which relates directly to the amount of risk and fire loss in the community, eventually, of course, to the payout by insurance industry. And the insurance companies may utilize this ISO rating. Some may have already developed their own system, and some in the process of utilizing the ISO rating system for underwriting purposes to develop their own premiums and insurance coverage. The rating process is basically comprised of they would send a questionnaire, we would fill it out. The questionnaire is an application, it's a 20-page long, and this is our application for this year with backup information, so it takes quite a bit of time and effort. We send them the questionnaire back, they would evaluate it and go through an analysis, and then they would do face-to-face interviews, which happened in February. And then after that, they validate all the information. They do auditing of all the data that's collected for each municipality, in this case Newport Beach for us. And then they would come up with a classification. And there's two classifications they would give. One is based on residential construction and one for commercial construction. The process is done every 5 years to make sure that the jurisdiction have adjusted or improved in their code application, or, of course, that would reflect again on the insurance premiums for that community. The point analysis for the building code effectiveness grading system is comprised of, I heard you mention that, three components. First is administration of codes, which comprise about 54%, and the plan review 23%. Field inspection is another 23%, adding to a total of 100%. And for the administration of codes, which involve the code adoption, the City of Newport Beach adopted the most recent codes. So we received the most possible points is 8, for example. We received a total of 8 for commercial, perfect score for, again, for residential. The county average here is 4.11, state average is 3.76, and the national average is 5.09 and 5.03, respectively. The administration of codes, again, involves education. When the building department hire or maintain highly qualified staff that are qualified into the application of codes, all our staff is, of course, have high qualifications and education. So the system will award credits to the department because they would recognize the ability of those individuals to apply the codes correctly and in a technical manner. Also, there are credits given for hours of training taken, and the hours of training could translate into the amount of physical training provided or the amount of dollars budgeted for training and spent on training during the evaluation period. We conduct in-house training every 2 weeks, an hour and a half, and there's a lot of in-house training done by the inspection staff, the engineers, and the whole department, and all that counts toward the credits for this rating system. So you can see here the training is also the building department or the city offers incentive for certification and for commercial and residential. And you can see here the county percentage is 79% of jurisdictions offer that, 71% statewide, 69% national. For commercial and residential is even less. So in this case we offer it, so we're at 100. We're one of the jurisdictions that offer it, compares to 79% here at the county that offers it. Again, for incentive for outside training or offering reimbursement for continuing education. Certification, again, we hire certified individuals. All our inspectors are certified by the code organizations. All our engineers are licensed by the state of California. And that, of course, translates a lot of credit for us. So here in this chart, which is out of the analysis and the report by ISO, it shows the blue, light blue here is Newport Beach, where 100% of our staff at the commercial plan review is certified, and compared to the county and state and national for each discipline of construction. And the same thing for residential. Here you can see that all our staff that does residential inspection and plan review are 100% here. They're all certified and registered. The plan review, there are benchmarks established by ISO for plan review and inspection. And basically, for plan review, they would evaluate the existing staffing, the experience of personnel, the detail of plan review, and the performance evaluation for quality. Basically, they look at the checklist we provide, how comprehensive is the checklist available for each category, and the type of projects we do conduct plan review for. Their benchmark average is 1 commercial plan review per day for full-time plan check engineer, and 2 residential plan review per day per plan check engineer. That's their benchmark. And that's based on an average of approximately 19,000 jurisdictions nationwide in commercial and residential combined. For inspection, they again would evaluate the existing staffing, and they would look at the number of inspections conducted, and they will average that out. If a jurisdiction does not have enough inspectors, then the load of inspection will be high compared to relative to staffing, and the benchmark they use is 10 inspections per day per inspector on the average. Also, how we manage the inspection, our automated system, the checklist, our special inspection program, we certify special inspectors, and they serve as augment our services in the field. The final inspection, issuing certificate of occupancy, and our inspection for natural hazard mitigation such as earthquake and flood prevention, and the quality control that we have for our inspection program. How did we do in the past? In 1997, our class was 3, and we scored 78.61 out of 100. In 2001, we received a score of 2, and we improved by 10 points, so we got to 88.3. In 2009, we received 93.26 in commercial classification and 92.86 in residential for a class of 1. And this is really significant. We're very proud of this achievement because, well, fireworks, because as you can see, out of 9,454, jurisdictions nationwide for two categories making up about 19,000, there is only 6 jurisdictions received a class of 1 in the country. So we're among less than 1,000% of those jurisdictions in the country receiving this rating. And this, again, how we compare to state and nationwide. And it shows here for the points we scored in the commercial plan review compared to the state, and then the nationwide here. And you can see how, and then for the points scored for inspection compared, again, to the state and nationwide. This is showing how jurisdictions throughout the years, the red chart showing the regress, which is how the jurisdictions actually dropped, and that because California was one of the few states that did not adopt the most recent codes, which affected many jurisdictions, and their classification actually dropped. This shows, the green chart shows, the green bar shows that our fewer jurisdictions actually improved their rating, and we're one of those, obviously, for, this is again for the residential, and this is for the commercial. This is our total grade. We received 49.63% for commercial for a maximum of 54, and plan review for commercial we received 21.66 for a maximum of 23, 21.97 maximum of 23 for field inspection, and similar numbers in residential. The maximum possible score is 100. What does this mean? It means that, of course, receiving 1 is the highest, and ISO will give credits based on that rating to all the subscribing insurance companies that could underwrite insurance policies to the community. So any building that would receive a certificate of occupancy from this year on forward could possibly receive a break on their premiums. And again, the reason and how this correlates is because ISO assumes that if you have an effective code application and a building department that has the highest rating, then you'll have less damage during a disaster. And when you have less damage, that means less payoff. So the risk is less, therefore there will be a reduction in premium. That basically concludes the presentation. Again, we're very proud, and I want to acknowledge the staff for doing a wonderful job putting this package together and for us to receive this kind of rating. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Councilman Gardner?
Just a comment, in looking at the chart that compared the city to the county, I think I understand why we have some problems in Newport Coast.
Any other comments?
Jay, I do have a couple of questions. One is, how long is the rating good for?
5 years.
And then how would the insurance companies be made aware that our rating moved to a 1, so that they might be able to take that into consideration as far as prices?
The insurance companies subscribe to the ISO rating system, and they have all that at their disposal electronically and all the data available. And they will be notified, of course, and they look at all the community's rating as it gets published. Not all insurance companies subscribe to the ISO rating system, so we recommend for our building owners in the community to seek out those insurance companies that utilize this service to get benefits of the rating that we received.
My last question would be, is there a greater likelihood that maybe a cost break would show up for commercial as opposed to residential property?
We're not sure how that is, but you're right. There would be a cost break larger for commercial properties because, again, the risk involved in the large volume and the larger buildings. So, yes. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Ham.
were you done? Okay. Well, congratulations on achieving this to you and your staff, Jay. Certainly puts you in unique company. Do all governmental agencies have to get these ISO examinations? Is this a voluntary thing? How does that work again?
That's a good question, Councilmember Hen. It's a voluntary program. However, most jurisdictions that I know of participate in it because even if you get a rating of 2 or 3, it does translate into a reduction of premiums versus 5 or 6, which is the average. So most jurisdictions do participate. It is a voluntary program.
So out of the 9,500 jurisdictions, more than half of those would participate in this program?
Those 9,500 jurisdictions are all participating in the
Oh, I
program.
see.
They're the one who participated.
I see.
Yeah, nationwide. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jay.
All right, thank you.
Hey, I guess I do have one other question, and that is, but if a building has been standing for, let's say, 20 years, or a house has been standing for 20 years, would the one rating have any effect from the insurance company as far as, then if the rating went to a 1 just here recently, I mean, wouldn't it kind of tend to go back to when the building was built?
Well, the rating period measures our performance and ability to apply the codes through a specific time period. And they assume that the buildings that are built during that time period onward will be utilizing our better and effective management of the codes, not going backwards. And that's why.
So I can't expect to see a line on my insurance bill that says premium reduced because of number 1 rating?
Unless you build a new house
Okay.
this year.
Mayor Pro Tem Curry?
Well, Jay, I also want to congratulate you and your staff on this accomplishment. You know, this is why it's important to measure what we do so that we know comparatively where we stand with other cities and jurisdictions. And for everyone who's had to deal with the building department and felt a little frustration, at least now there's the comfort of knowing that we're dealing with one of the most competent, highly trained, and professional organizations in America. And because of the high standards of what we have in terms of our building codes and how we administer those, that's one of the things that helps preserve and enhance the value of our community and the value of everybody's property. And everyone should understand the direct correlation that comes from having a strong building code that's well enforced in a community versus one that's not. So congratulations.
Thank you, Councilmember Terry.
Okay, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Jay. Okay, does anyone from the public want to comment on this item? Okay, seeing no one, we'll move on to our next item, which is item number 3, Tide Pool Program Update and Marine Life Act MLPA issue.
We're going to separate these just a little bit. Oh, Dave, maybe we aren't. Are you going to take the marine life protection, or are you going to
I'm
introduce
just going to
this?
introduce it.
Okay.
Thanks, Homer. Thank you, Homer, Mayor, City Council members. It's been a little bit of a time since we've brought the Tide Pool Protection Program to you, so I thought it might be a good opportunity for you and the public to get a reminder as summer starts as to what we do to protect the tide pools and how we educate folks. So Michelle Clemente is our tide pool supervisor, and she's been with us for a short period of time, so it's an opportunity to introduce her to you as well. So as a reminder, tide pools are within the Harbor Resources Division, and Michelle works out at Big Corona State Beach. So I think you'll get a good flavor for her program as she comes up and speaks to you. The other part of this agenda item was intended to be the Marine Life Protection Act discussion, and I didn't ask Michelle to touch on that today during her presentation, although Michelle is quite involved in that process, as is Councilmember Daigle. We think there's probably a better time to do that. That might be next month or the following month, as that issue gets a little bit closer to a decision point potentially in September. We're also missing a couple of people that I think were important to have here for different perspectives on the Marine Life Protection Act, if you really want to get into a meaty discussion about that. And Councilmember Gardner is looking at me funny. So.
Well, this is something that the Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee wanted to comment on because, and I'm sure that Councilwoman Daigle can mention this more, because I've been to lunches where there are people that are stakeholders, and they keep saying, where's Newport? Where's your position? And unfortunately, Councilwoman Daigle is not representing the city on this. She's representing communities as a stakeholder.
I've been appointed to represent local government, and as such, because of having worked on the scale of regional issues.
So anyway.
But, however, this is my home.
Right.
And
but
I'm on the city council, and I want to stay on the city council, so
well, I just
there's
meant
that aspect of it.
that
And, you know, our heritage as a harbor is all very important. So the positions that I take would be, you know, weighing the science and trying to balance the interests.
Right, but it would be nice to, I'm sure you'd have even more confidence if we at least had expressed a position on something. And the thing that raised concerns for me is that I was at a luncheon recently, and someone came up who is a stakeholder and said, why are you supporting the bay would be a protected area with the most protection. And I said, oh, yeah, the upper bay. And he went, no, the whole bay. And that would be that somebody had proposed and was accepted for a period before it was rejected, that the whole bay, upper and lower, be a no-take preserve. Well, I don't know anybody locally that wants that. I mean, people fish off the piers and everything. So that's why I have been concerned. I think the Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee was concerned that some of these things may be coming up, and nobody, since they are impacting us, we should be taking some positions on it. We can do it later, but
not too much later.
Yeah.
I respect that. Because I do think there is an opportunity, and will be in a short period of time, an opportunity for Newport Beach to be heard. What I'd like to do at that point is explain the process a little bit and explain the different discussions about what could be applicable to Newport. So, and again, I think that's timely and coming up here, but not as timely today, especially missing a couple of folks that we thought would be helpful for that discussion, like including the representatives from state parks, because arguably Newport would be making a decision on a large swath of territory that is technically in the state park boundary. So with that said, I welcome your questions after Michelle's presentation, and maybe because as Michelle will say, she never presents anywhere without MLPA coming up, regardless of what she's trying to say. So with that, I'd like to introduce Michelle.
Where is the state park boundary in regard to the water? I never thought of that.
It goes, well, technically, actually, let me let Michelle answer that question.
Okay.
But I would also be delighted for the council to take a position on the lower and upper bay. It gives me cover, so I don't have a problem with that. It's when you get into some of the other areas that it becomes a little less, other stakeholders.
Thank you, Dave. Honorable Mayor, City Council, thank you for letting me speak about this program today. As Dave mentioned, my name is Michelle Clementi, and I am the new Marine Education and Protection Supervisor here in Newport Beach. I've been here for about a year, actually a little over a year now. And how do you do the line?
This
Okay.
button there moves it forward.
Speaking of the area, the Robert E. Badham State Marine Conservation Area lies from Poppy Street at the north down to Cameo Shores at the south, and the state park begins this point south. It stretches about 200 feet offshore, and as you know, the Crystal Cove area, that's an underwater park, it stretches about a quarter of a mile offshore. The Newport Beach Marine Life Refuge was established in 1968, initially as a part of marine safety. Monitoring began in the early 1970s, and due to increased population and pressure on the area gained attention again in the 80s and 90s. The quote, "It was loved to death." I heard rumor that at one point there were at least 2,000 school-age students on the rocks at one time down at Little Corona. So what is a marine refuge? A marine refuge is used synonymously with a marine protected area. Marine protected area is more commonly used universally or throughout the globe. California currently has 3 levels of marine protected areas. There's a marine reserve, which is no-take, commercial or recreational. Marine park, which is there's restrictions on commercial take. Actually, there's restrictions on recreational take and commercial uses, and then a marine conservation area, which has limited commercial and recreational take. Little Corona, which is also known as the Robert E. Badham State Marine Conservation Area, is a marine conservation area by the state. So why develop marine protected areas? Basically, habitat protection, maintaining biological diversity, providing natural areas for research, and to preserve locations for educational and recreational activities. These are the fish and game regulations that pertain to the area. I'm not going to go over all of them, but the Robert E. Badham State Marine Conservation Area is also called the Robert E. Badham Area of Biological Significance. Those areas have different boundaries, but they both have the name Robert E. Badham. I only deal with the marine protected area component of it. Here's a nice picture of people standing on mussels while they're fishing. Ecological concerns facing marine protected areas are visitor foot traffic, urban runoff, sewage and industrial discharge, unlawful harvesting, human manipulation of intertidal rocks and organisms, and oil or other toxic spills. Our program primarily focuses on visitor foot traffic and human manipulation. We've also started doing some programs called Drains to Ocean, where we talk about urban runoff and how that impacts the rocky intertidal habitat. As a representative from the City of Newport Beach, I am involved in the Orange County Marine Protected Areas Council. This was a subcommittee that came off of the Orange County Coastal Coalition to deal with issues that pertain primarily to rocky intertidal habitat. And there's representatives from the county, Laguna Beach, Dana Point, Crystal Cove, Cal State Fullerton, different non-governmental organizations such as like the Ocean Institute, and we discuss and come up with solutions in a collaborative way as far as dealing with issues in the rocky intertidal. If you go to any rocky intertidal area, marine protected area in Orange County, you will see the same signs, you will see the same information being handed out. We speak collectively, communicate together. We've done enforcement training, teacher workshops. We facilitate research and management and educational programs.
That's really quite a collaboration that's going on, a real pioneering effort that's been able to develop some infrastructure. How long has that been going on?
It's been going on for about 11 years, and I have to say, being new to it, it's one of the best-run organizations I've ever worked with. It's a really good group. They're good at finding money. They're really, really well organized. It's nice. Which falls into our focus at Little Corona, Robert E. Badham. Everything we do reflects why the area is special and how we can best enjoy it, but enjoy it respectfully. And one thing that came from the Orange County Marine Protected Areas Council is the good tide pooler rules. And we hand these handouts to, they have some animals on them, and they also have the good tide pooler rules. And we hand these out to everybody that we contact that comes down to Little Corona. We take them to outreach. I have them in my purse, in my car. I have them everywhere. We hand them out. Everything we do reflects how to enjoy this habitat respectfully. We also have them printed on the back of our tide tables, so that's our mantra. We have it everywhere. So if you come down to the beach, you will definitely get one of these probably if you see us. But it's the backbone of what we do. We really work hard to try to get people to understand that standing on the mussels is actually killing the mussels. And this is the office. This is our office at Big Corona. We have about 10 rangers. The rangers, I am working right now to change their title to marine educators because they really function primarily as educators. We utilize Robert E. Badham, which Little Corona. We also use the tide pools at Pirates Cove, as well as the tide pools at the south end of Big Corona, and we also use the jetty because sometimes there's too much surge to use tide pools. In the past, the primary focus of this program was to take school groups down to Little Corona on a tour, and monitoring also included rangers set up at Little Corona explaining the tide pooler rules and as well as fish and game regulations. We have now revamped our program, and it looked a little more colorful on my computer, but we've revamped our program. We've focused mostly on kindergarten through third grade programs, but we also facilitate through 8th grade and scout groups. This year, and this is my first year, so this is the first year I've tracked it, but we did over 9,000 students this year in formal programs, K through 8. We've also begun participating in environmental fairs and going and doing outreach about the marine protected areas and rocky intertidal habitat. And this year we reached over 7,000 school-aged children in formal outreach programs. We also facilitate small beach cleanups through scout groups, as well as the California Coastal Cleanup Day with over 1,000 participants every year. Our staff provides interpretation and monitoring of Robert E. Badham during low tide periods and heavy visitation. We have started moving around and actually walking through the entire marine protected area and not just setting up at Little Corona, but we've also started setting up interpretive stations at Little Corona where people can touch artifacts. Since we don't allow them to touch in the tide pools, we give them something to touch before they get out on the rocks. We also have facilitated 60 university research groups this year. When I first started, there was some division in our group about what it was that we were doing. So our first task was to develop a mission statement. And our mission statement is to foster stewardship of rocky intertidal ecosystems through education, outreach, and service. And we really have worked hard this year to change from an enforcing group to more of an educating group. And we feel that if we're passionate and excited and positive about what we're doing, it's a lot more effective than telling people, no, you can't do that. So we have really changed the crux of what we do, and I think it's been very positive. Again, we've reached over 15,000 people this year, and we have made approximately 100,000 public contacts. So there's 11 of us down there. I think we've done really well. I was surprised at how much we've actually gotten to do down there, and I think we can do a lot more. We have provided information and education on the marine environment in a positive way. We do beach cleanups, and we have tried to guide human behavior. We have worked hard to collaborate with people in the community, and we have extended our message outside of just Orange County with the environmental fairs. Moving forward, we've done a lot this year. We've updated our approach. I think we've been very effective in that. But we are looking to do more, and we have just started actually this month doing our marine docent program. My goal was to have 10 people this year, and we have 9. We have 9 marine docents that are complementing city staff down on the tide pools with interpretive tables and also doing hikes. We're working with Oasis Senior Center, and about half of our docents come from the Oasis Senior Center. We're continually evaluating and expanding our program. This past month, we tried a traveling tide pool, piloted a couple of classes, and we need to make some modifications, but I think next year we might be offering an opportunity for the tide pools to go to the schools instead of having the kids come down to the tide pools. And, you know, with budget issues, busing is a problem for a lot of the schools, so this would be a way to get the message out without having the schools need to bus children. And we're also talking about developing a tide pool program with the public library. But we're also looking to address marine protection. This is something that my first year we focused mostly on education, but Robert E. Badham is a marine protected area, and it has certain legal protections that ordinary coastal areas don't have. This primarily falls under the jurisdiction of Fish and Game, but because Fish and Game has priority differences and also staffing issues, that's very spotty at best. So while our program's focusing on education, we are looking to possibly bring some ordinances that are similar to Newport, or similar to Laguna Beach and Dana Point, so that can assist us in the management of the area. This past year, we've also introduced ourselves to the Back Bay Science Center. We've been out there, staff has been out there, and I have been out there, and we're working to work with the program committee to develop ways that Newport Beach can be active out at Back Bay. We've also introduced the Orange County Natural History Lecture Series. This was a pre-existing program. It's been in Orange County for, I think, about 7 years now. We've taken it over. Newport Beach hosts it at Back Bay Science Center. It started in March of 2009. It's held the first Wednesday of every month from 7 to 9, and we bring in various speakers about local natural history And we adopted the old distribution list, but we're working on it. But currently, we distribute it to about 300 people. In summary, I am so thankful to have such a fun job. I have an office at Big Corona. I hardly ever have to dress like this. I'm very, very fortunate. I think this is a great program. It has the potential for incredible things in the future, but I can't take credit for it all. The location speaks for itself, and we have a wonderful product, and we have even more amazing people. So thanks for the opportunity. And I found this while I was going through things. This was from a field guide in 1974, and it says, "Little Corona lasts only by our care." Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Daigle.
A question for you. I know you came from the Santa Ana Zoo, was it? Right. And just a short time here in Newport, you've made a tremendous positive impact. So thank you. And with regards to your counterpart in Laguna Beach, I know you have a really nice office, but are there other things that they're doing in Laguna Beach that maybe we could consider doing in Newport Beach?
They have an entirely different structure than ours. Their equivalent to me is in the Marine Safety Department. It's a lot heavier on enforcement. They have different, because of the organization, they have different resources available to them. I was brought on primarily in the education function. Dana Point also has what they call a natural resources supervisor, which functions in the same way. And the Dana Point position is similar. It's kind of a hybrid of what we do here and what Laguna Beach does. So there are a lot of different ways to approach it. Currently, we approach it more from an education point of view.
Okay. Is there any practices there? You know, you mentioned some ordinances that we might want to consider in Newport Beach.
Yeah, they have ordinances on the books in Laguna Beach and Dana Point, which are very similar to what the Fish and Game regulations are. They've just adopted them as city ordinances to give a little more potential for enforcement. Right now, if there are violations that occur down at Robert E. Badham, we would call Fish and Game and hope they would come out if it was a Fish and Game violation. Usually that doesn't really happen because most of their enforcement is ocean-based and not land-based. So it would help us from the land side of things to be able to enforce some of the violations that we see.
Okay. And then on the Back Bay Science Center, I know that a lot of the community's money was invested in that structure, and appreciate that you're a liaison to that. So maybe at some point in the future would be interested in knowing more about what kind of programs you think would be possible. But I know people in the community ask me, you know, what's going on behind that gate. So people would love to have access to
I
programs.
think as we start doing the natural history lecture series, too, we can get people in there so they can see it a little more. And it is one of my goals this year to figure out how we're going to function out there.
Councilman Webb?
Yeah, Leslie brought up a question I've had for a while. When is the Back Bay Science Center open to the public? Every time I've been by there, the gate's been closed. No trespassing.
It's actually not open to the public. It's open
Why
for
did we spend
programs.
so much money?
Well, we'll figure that out, and we'll do something really good out there. But no, it has programs, formal programs, which are open to the public, and if you are a participant in the program, you can go on grounds, but it's not open. I know that there's talk, and this is one way Newport Beach could facilitate it being open, is running walks and doing tours out there, which I think is a way my office could definitely help out there.
Well,
This year.
We do need the help because the school district trustees, I took with them on a little tour. I mean, it's like the Pentagon there in terms of getting access. So
We
I
can
think
work
we need
on
to
that.
address that.
Councilman Gardner?
Weren't there some issues between Fish and Game and the naturalists and everything about programs there? I mean, have those been settled? Because there were some turf wars there that I think slowed things down, too.
Don't you have any MLPA questions? No. Councilmember Gardner, the Back Bay Science Center continues to be challenging it was always set up as a research-based center that generally people would be brought in to participate in the research programs. It is all Fish and Game's property, so they have a fairly tight control over that. They do open up to the public on estuary awareness days, and as Michelle noted, if you're involved in one of their existing programs, it's open. Our goal, and I share that with Michelle, is to increase city residents' access to it. As the programs are built, though, that will come forward, and the naturalists are very active in working with Fish and Game. I don't know if you saw their latest Tracks newsletter. They have a lot of programs now coming out of the Back Bay Science Center, so we're definitely ramping up the use out there, and hopefully we'll get to a point where it does return the kind of value that I think everyone envisioned.
Okay, any other questions, comments?
Mr. Mayor, can I ask you a question? Michelle, I think we would be remiss, though, if we didn't talk just a little bit about enforcement. I mean, is enforcement at the level and to the success that you are pleased with?
I think there is a potential for greater enforcement. Like I said, this year we've really been working on getting the word out, and that has been very effective. It would be nice to have the potential to back up what we're teaching. I think right now we have the responsibility and not necessarily the authority to enforce it. And I'm hesitant to step out and take a strong approach, because I think if you can't back up a strong approach with some legal consequence, you're actually reinforcing the negative behavior. So it's better to turn a blind eye to some things right now, because we can't really make somebody stop. We can't give them any consequence for doing something bad. So I think that leaves us hanging out in the wind a little bit. I think if we could educate people when you see something egregious, then enforce that with something a little stronger and be able to back it up, I think that's the best approach.
What kind of things do you have to turn a blind eye to?
People taking stuff off the rocks, pulling mussels off the rocks. You can tell them no, but you can't. There's no way to back it up. You can call Fish and Game and they don't show up. So things like that. I mean, I don't see a lot of really egregious stuff. You see little things, and it's not too bad. But it would be nice when you see big things to be able to do something about it.
Councilwoman Gardner, do you have something?
Another question I had is, you said 9,000 school children down there. Do we get advance warning of when these kids are
Oh,
coming?
yes.
Okay.
That's what I spend most of my spring doing. Yeah, those are through formal reserved education programs. So generally in the fall, I start taking reservations. And the entire month of May was booked up by February. So we have actually this year I think there were only 5 schools that showed up without reservations. So the word's getting out and people are complying.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody from the audience want to make any comments on this? Okay. Anything else, Dave? No. That's it? Okay, we'll move on to our last discussion item, which is revisions to the city's water conservation ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, it seems like we can't get past a study session without talking about water issues of some sort. So today we're going to talk about a water conservation ordinance that we intend to bring forward. But of course, before we do, we'd really like to make sure that it is in tune with what you would like to see. So we're going to be talking about some philosophical issues today. And George is going to give us a little background to get us there.
Well, thank you, Homer, and good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. As Homer said, we keep bringing back these water issues, and I hate to be the boy that cries wolf, but there is actually a wolf out there. We are running out of water. And so one of the things, staff's been working on this conservation ordinance for a few months, and we thought that it was appropriate to bring to you some of these decisions along the way that make up this ordinance. Rather than just bring it in front of you, I thought maybe we could just come and talk about it, and you could tell us what's important to you to implement into the proposed ordinance. Before I go there's really 4 main reasons why we're updating the ordinance. I'll try to go over this briefly, and we can get into the heart of what's in our ordinance. But the primary reason is really we're running out of water. You know, we get our water from two different sources, our groundwater and our imported sources. And this year, in fiscal year 08-09, the basin pumping percentage was reduced by 5%. And this coming year, as I announced or I put in our budget presentation, is fiscal year 9-10, where that's being reduced by 7%. And we're already hearing rumors that it may be reduced by 7 or 8% next year. So as our source water from the groundwater reduces, we become more dependent on our import sources, which is the Metropolitan Water District. Now
George,
yes.
just a quick question. Just out of curiosity, I understand about the groundwater, so we
Sure.
buy whatever we're short from MWD.
Correct.
Is there a limit on how much water? I mean, is it just a matter of we have to pay the price, or there's a limit on how much they'll actually sell us?
Well, this year, July 1st, 2009, the Met Board adopted an allocation plan for all agencies who are member agencies. So they're asking all agencies to reduce by 15%. Yes, there's water there, but instead of paying $700 an acre foot, we're looking at about $2,500 an acre foot. And so this, overall, depending on the percentage and how much we use, of course, could be $1 million or $2 million more in our budget than we first anticipated. So I think that the idea is if they increase the price enough by going over your allocation, that you will be forced to reduce. Now, is there an infinite amount of water out there? No. I think if everybody kept pumping over their allocation and we kept pumping out of the basin and buying water from it, it will run out. Everybody's seen on the news and the media that these reservoirs, I think Be Water Wise, which is a commercial run by the Metropolitan Water District, shows these reservoirs near extremely low levels. Before, when I came to you, I said, well, they're at 50%. Well, now we're seeing 30%. The basin, Orange County Water Basin, which was okay, we were getting 69% of our water from there. We're now saying, well, next year, boy, we really got to cut back to 54% because we haven't had any local rainfall, is at 400 acre-foot overdraft. So we're not seeing the rain. We don't see the snowpack. Of course, I've talked a little bit before about the water supplies from Northern California being affected by the production of the Delta smelt. And so they can't pump as much. So there's about a 40% reduction from Northern California. We don't see any short-term solution. So we must reduce. Some of the reasons, and hopefully that answers your question. So is it infinite? Is there water out there?
Well, I realize it's
Maybe.
not an infinite supply, but I guess my question was, are they just telling us you can only buy X amount and that's it?
Yep.
Or we can buy as much as we want as long as we're willing to pay the price?
This is the first year that you can buy as much. I guess you go into penalties. So yes, we now have a definite number of how much water we can buy from them. If you exceed that, you will pay extreme penalties. So that's for this year. Next year may not be the case.
But you only pay the $2,500 for what you're over your baseline, whatever it is.
Correct, for this year.
As far as the groundwater basin is concerned, though, Orange County Water District, I guess, is the one that I'm trying to think of, they indicate that of our total usage, we can only pump X amount.
Yes.
And that's something that they once we get to that amount, we're not allowed to pump anymore?
Well, this is the first year before it's called the Basin Equity Assessment, and that's what you would pump over your allotment from the groundwater basin. In the past, it was a reasonable number. It was a little bit more than we normally pay. This year, this is the first year, that number is going to $3,000 an acre foot. Whoa. So it's severe penalties.
Okay, and what is our normal price for pumped well water?
For just the actual replenishment assessment, I believe this year is close to $400 an acre foot. Now we pay some electricity
so it's about 7-8 times the amount.
Yeah, easily.
Now, you mentioned 400 acre foot overdraft. Is that above and beyond what is being replenished through the groundwater replenishment program?
Well, what we lost every year, what happened in the Orange County Water District is that they purchased excess water from the Metropolitan Water District, which was 65,000 acre foot of water, and they would put that in storage. When Metropolitan Water District last year faced this shortage of getting water through the Delta, that source went away. Right at the same year, the groundwater replenishment system went online. The first year they pumped about 50,000 acre foot into the basin, and I think they're close to 65,000 acre foot. So it's about equal to what they purchased from Met. The incidental recharge from the rainfall really affects our local basin. So that's the local rainfall and snowpack in the Sierras and the close Orange County water supply. And when I say 400 acre foot, 400,000 acre-foot overdrafted draft. That number is really hard because you picture it as an underground lake, and it would say it would only hold 500,000 acre-foot. Well, when they say if it's full, then it's not overdrafted. As it reduces down, goes lower and lower, we're at about 400,000. So when we hit 500, the wells go dry, no more water comes out. Some agencies in Orange County are already experiencing that. Their bowls are going dry. So they shut down those wells, they go to other ones. So even though they're putting in water from the groundwater replenishment system, it's just not enough without local rain supply. So
One thing that they are going to come before the council, I think their board member, Gian DeBay, asked to do a presentation. That is to try and expand the basin. And, of course, that infrastructure costs money. And what they're ultimately kind of teeing up for is that if Newport would support a bond, a state water bond. So they do have plans to try to expand the infrastructure.
So I think there's some long-term solutions to try to get around this delta issue. Short-term, we don't see that. We see long-term solutions, and where Southern California will eventually, it's going to cost money. I mean, really, it's the bottom line. It's how to do a peripheral canal, or how to move the pumps, or how to create these screens to keep the delta smelt and the salmon out. I think I had mentioned before that there are other endangered species that are being added to the list as we speak. So as we protect the smelt and the salmon may be affected. So this year, what Met has done is they're drawing off storage. And actually, I didn't want to get there right away off the beginning, but I've invited Carl Seckel, the Assistant General Manager of the Municipal Water District, to come and answer some of the detailed questions about the source water with import, and maybe I could hand it to him in a few minutes.
As I understand the delta smelt issue, what's happening is there's this little fish, the delta smelt, that's endangered species. And the Endangered Species Act isn't about balancing things, it's about protecting the fish. And so the fish is going into these giant turbines that are grinding it up. And so the regulators have said no more, fish in the turbines, you've got to find something else. And so the purpose of the peripheral canal is to build this 20-mile by freeway-wide canal that would divert the water out of there. So that's kind of I would assume the latest plan that they're trying to float.
Yeah, Carl, I don't know if you have any more information about what Met is doing in regards to that. But yes, I think that it's also the level of the delta. As it gets drier, they're concentrated, the fish are getting down. And so they've restricted pumping through certain seasons, which is another issue. And so, we just haven't had the rainfall in even Northern California snowpack to keep the delta full enough to run the pumps. But I don't know if you have any more comments about that. But we certainly get back to you on what I think the thing is you just can't go build this thing overnight. It's going to take 30 years to do that, and we just haven't had the rainfall. And although it was coming, I think as the legislation passed, they weren't expecting these restrictions. The first year was 20%, then 30%, then 40%, and in addition to a 3-year running drought. So you weren't getting the rainfall to keep the delta full as well. So all these things are, like I said the last time, I think it was a perfect storm of just all these problems with water supply. So.
What's the forecast in the near term, let's say next 2, 3, 4 years, as far as what we're going to be able to get from the groundwater basin?
I just heard rumors just this last week that it would reduce to about 54%. That's our BPP. We had anticipated and projected 60%. We were hoping for local rainfall, of course, so if we all hope really hard, maybe it'll rain. But if it doesn't, it looks like they'll have to continue to reduce that basin pumping percentage so it doesn't go dry.
Where is that level where you also have to start worrying about the saltwater intrusion?
We really, the barrier seems to be, that's primarily what the groundwater replenishment system took over for Water Factory 21 when they were maintaining the barrier. We're doing okay. Like I said, I don't think it's saltwater. The level has dropped. I think they're maintaining the barrier, but when we get to about this 450 overdraft mark, we'll start seeing where they can't overcome the seawater. And so it'll start. But everybody's really far enough away from the barrier that we won't suck salt water before we'll suck air. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, that's very comforting.
I know. It's all bad news.
Yeah. But just a quick question.
Sure.
We've talked about $400 per acre foot, $3,000 per acre foot.
Right.
Do you happen to know just generally the cost of desalinization for fresh water? What would be the per acre cost for that?
You know, that is an interesting topic, and that is something that San Diego's pursuing, and we also know about the Poseidon project here in Huntington Beach. But initially, when it was first thought of a few years ago, it was about $700 an acre foot. I think they're up to somewhere around $1,500 to $2,000 an acre foot. It's privately owned, so really they'll set the price based on demand. And they're right now trying to get cities and districts and agencies interested in, are you interested? How much are you willing to participate in conveying water? Because really the issue is trying to get the water from the plant to the next district. So I know they're working with some Mesa Consolidated Water District and some other agencies on how to convey that water across town. But yeah, it would be about that. Now, to mitigate the environmental issues, I don't know if that price is tagged onto the top of that. What would they have to do so they don't suck brine shrimp into the desal pumps? I don't know, and I don't think they know that. So there are some environmental hurdles that they'll have to overcome, which usually equates to dollars. So, well, the reason I came was this conservation ordinance. Many folks are thinking right away for the short-term solution is let's implement a conservation ordinance. If nothing else, let's stop the wasting of water. Now, I wrote down 4 primary reasons why, and there is a lot of legislation here, and I don't want to bore you with that. So please feel free to ask me some questions. But these, as I just talked about, the BMP is, their basin pumping percentage is, the BPP, excuse me, is reducing over the next couple of years. So we're more dependent on the Met. I talked to you a little bit about the Metropolitan Water District adopted that allocation plan, which is effective July 1st, and that's a 15% reduction. Now, we're ready to face that challenge this year, but there doesn't seem to be a current mechanism for us to require our residents or ask our residents to reduce to meet that target. We can pay the extra penalty once we exceed, we don't happen to make that reduction. We can pay those penalties, but there's no mechanism currently in our ordinance. The ordinance that we have was adopted in 1992, updated in 1996, and it was based on the drought of 1990. So the base periods on how we established this conservation ordinance that our current ordinance has was based on meter readings and usage from the 1990s. So one, it needs to be updated. When you do update this ordinance, you will have to address the penalties, which were in the form of surcharges. We actually said if you used over X amount of gallons per day, you would be surcharged on your bill. And also penalties that just flat out said, if you didn't cut back 10%, here's a penalty. All those things fall under the Prop 218 issues we talked about a little bit at a previous meeting. So once we update our current ordinance, we will have to comply with Prop 218, and that will be the public notice and the protest issue. So the whole ordinance needs to be updated. We thought that we would just go through it and perhaps tackle it in a little different direction. There are funding restrictions that you need to know, and that's that if you don't comply with and there's a bunch of the AB 2175, which is the governor's cut 20% by year 2020, that they will start withholding funding opportunities. I suppose if I put my glasses on, I could tell you what they are. So that the governor's 2020 plan calls for 5% in year 2012, 10% in 2015, and 20%, of course, by 2020. It requires that we implement a conservation plan, and also you heard a lot about these best management practices. This is the California Urban Water Conservation Council developed these best management practices. And these are required for several of the assembly bills, the AB 2175, the AB 1420, and it's also part of our urban water management plan. And these are just practices on conservation and have measures in there that they're asking us to incorporate into our conservation plan so we can receive some of this funding. And see, Carl
George,
yeah.
When you say asking, I want to be real clear on
Sure.
that. If we say, I see all this red ink, it's a Met ordinance. In other words, it's required by the Met. If we don't do it, we say, hey, we don't want to do it. What happens specifically?
Well,
we just disregard that.
On the ordinance, the draft ordinance that I initially,
Yeah,
okay.
if we just said to the Met, oh, you have this ordinance, but we're going to disregard it, what is the
Okay, on the
Impact.
Met portion, and this is the hard part on the details, the Met would be the Met funding, and these are those incentive programs that we offered for ultra-low flush toilets and the ET control. Any program that they fund or they give to our residents and the city, they would no longer give us if we did not incorporate those sections into our conservation plan. If you do not adopt the BMPs, those best management practices under AB 1420, you cannot access CalFed, Department of Water Resource funding, DWR, State Water Resources Control Board funding. And so you see the state agencies are now getting involved in saying, well, you need to implement these BMPs or we're not going to give you funding for that too. Now, I know that that's minor because there's not a lot of state funding. We see that they're borrowing money from everybody, so they don't have a lot of money given away. However, if that comes available after July by either Met, MODOC, state, federal, we wouldn't be eligible to get any of that. I don't think that that's, the straw that broke the camel's back here, but I think it's something you need to be aware of. Should there be these funding opportunities come around from the federal government or the state, that we'd want to comply. But that, again, is your policy, your decision, should you feel that that's important.
Carl Seckel from MODOC. Minor nuance on the funding from Metropolitan. They have a couple categories of it. If the funding from Met comes through to MODOC and it's a program that we have that we operate that works directly with your residents, that would still be available to your residents. If it's money that would come from Metropolitan straight to the city or to a public entity within the city, that's the money that gets restricted if you don't do the ordinance in compliance with the Met provision. So it's part of the money would still come through and part of it would be restricted on the Met side of things.
Is MODOC imposing any requirements?
Our job is to get as much money from as many sources as we can and help our agencies. So we're trying to stay out of the middle of this. We're trying to make the Met compliance as easy as possible and implement as many conservation programs in the county as we can from whatever money sources we can scrape together.
So, and as the last really of the item and why we're trying to update this is that financial risk, which we've already talked about, and that's if we do go over our allocation, it could financially hurt us. So, now to move forward with a conservation ordinance. I don't know, Leilani, did everybody get? There was a matrix that we passed out, and we thought the easiest way to kind of talk about the details of the draft ordinance. We did draft an ordinance, and what makes up our ordinance are permanent restrictions. These are every day, how you use water, relief from compliance, shortage levels. We have four shortage levels. And then, of course, the failure to comply, the enforcement. And so rather than hand you this huge document, we made up this little matrix that just outlines, and I'll explain a little bit about these colors, is the permanent restrictions. The items in red is that Met model ordinance. Met actually developed a model ordinance with sections in there back in January and handed it out to agencies and said, well, if you want our funding, these are the items that you'll need to incorporate into your ordinance. So the items in red under permanent restrictions, I suppose we should just start there, are no watering between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. or, this is the toughest one, so I put it first, irrigation system limit of 15 minutes. That was an either or from Met. So we had to adopt one of them if we want to receive their funding. And so in our model, in our draft, we actually had put the irrigation system limit of 15 minutes. We found it problematic that for gardeners to be at the residents' homes and they want to test the sprinkler, they're working on the system, or they just planted the new plants, they run the sprinklers, that we're going to hit them with a violation, a municipal code violation. So we went the 15 minutes per day. And that, of course, this is just a brief overview of it. The 15 minutes does not affect those that have the sprinkler heads that are already efficient. So we have there are exceptions to this, but we would limit the residents to 15 minutes per day. The no watering 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
George,
Yes.
I got a question.
Sure.
When you say limit to 15 minutes, is that per irrigation station
Yes.
or the total amount of time that you have?
Per station. And I think
Per station,
and the idea is to prevent runoff. is really what we're after.
You perhaps might want to mention that on there because it's a little confusing.
Sure.
Just at 15 minutes.
Yeah, so 15 minutes for the lawn, 15 minutes for the shrub, and 15 minutes, right. I agree. The no watering between 9 and 5, the reason that got into the ordinance, what we believe is that some of the inland empire areas and desert communities, you see when they water in the middle of summer, you have a lot of evaporation. It's not efficient to do that, but we don't see that in the coastal communities. Although it gets warm here in the coast, it doesn't get, it's not at a level where we see the evaporation. So our recommendation would be to use the 15 minutes, but again, ultimately, it's your decision. And just the actual item itself is a requirement of the Met ordinance. No excessive water flow runoff. It's a Met requirement. It's an item in green. That's in our current, the greens are all our current ordinance issues, permanent restrictions in our current ordinance. So the blue is the best management practices, the California Urban Water Conservation Council, BMP. And so we highlighted those. Some of them are in both, so you also see I put also BMP requirement in some of those sections. But each one of these items, the black later on in the other ones you'll see is really just a Met recommendation, but it's not a requirement. And then the brown is what was in our draft ordinance. And these are ones, we sorted them out. It doesn't matter where you put them as long as they get there, get into your conservation ordinance. And we placed them in there looking at other agencies' ordinances, comparing everybody's, how they use water and what works best for the city. And we shifted them around what we thought worked well, and then we took it to the Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee and discussed it there as well. So permanent restriction.
Where did the brown ones come again from? I'm confused on that.
Those are, some of them are the recommendations that we adopted from Met. Met recommended some of these things. They're not mandatory. We left them in there. Like the no irrigating during rain. We thought that was a good decision. We think that that's a pretty good idea. So an auto shut-off landscape meters would be required by July 1st, 2012. And some of those were what we see in other people's ordinances. They're not a requirement for funding, but we put them in there because we basically thought they were a good idea. But the wash down of vehicles only with the bucket or shut-off nozzle. We have that you can't wash off your sidewalks, and some of those we already had, but we put them in as a permanent restriction. I think in our current ordinance, we have that later on saying, well, if the water's short, you can't use a bucket or wash vehicles, you don't use, or a shut-off nozzle. So we put it in as a permanent restriction. Again, these are in our draft ordinance, so these are however you feel about it.
In level 2, you have, it says no filling of residential pools or outdoor spas. That would be the Met recommendation, but then your recommendation would be for us that it would only be once every other week?
Yeah, in level 2, the significant shortage, one of the things you'll notice in the levels is that we actually start reducing consumption. That is something that we added that is not in any of the other ordinances. And we start talking about a percentage. We ask our customers to reduce by 11 to 25%. When on the permanent restrictions, like once filling the pool once every other week, we're a little more lenient if they can reduce by 11 to 25% by another means. Later on, if you get into a more severe drought issue, then we restrict it even further. If you see in the next one, prohibit filling of fountains and pools to once a week in level 3, and then of course in level 4 you won't fill it at all. So we tried to even it out and make it a little bit of a gradual, as the conditions get worse, restrictions get worse. And there was 2 ways to tackle this. You can tackle conservation with permanent restrictions by just keep adding on more permanent restrictions, or you can ask the residents to reduce by a percentage. Even if you put in all the permanent restrictions, we felt that everybody complies, but we're still not cutting back. We'll be back to you, asking you to adopt by resolution the next level, and we just keep adding on more permanent restrictions.
George?
Yeah.
So you say reducing utilization or consumption by 11 to 25%.
Correct.
Compared to what?
That's the question.
What's the base period?
That's the question. Right now, coming out in this month, our bills will show a 3-year running average of that same base period, that same billing cycle for that customer. That is a great, awesome question, because, based on what? Is it, if you just moved in and you didn't have that historical data, would we be looking at who lived there before? And what if, grandma and the other extended family came to stay with you for the summer? Are we going to have to create these exceptions? So that's a great question. Based on what? What we came up with would be the 3-year running average. It's the best way. We're requiring them to cut back 11% of what they did that same billing period. So if it was July to August of this year, it would be July of August last year. The winter time, of course.
This is based on what's already accumulated in the water billing system.
For that resident. Now, that is later on.
So if I move in with a family of 3 daughters, which I raised, my
Right.
consumption pattern might automatically be different, right, than the couple with no kids that had the house before I bought it.
Certainly. And this is one of the reasons I'm here. There are 2 methods to do that.
George, correct me if I'm wrong, though. Looking at this water conservation ordinance is a very difficult way to get water conservation. And really what we need to be talking about, we need to do this, but what we need to also be talking about is tiered rates in terms of, it's really going to be the cost that's going to drive down usage. And conservation measures are going to drive down usage somewhat, but the enforcement of this is just going to be, totally beyond anything that we want to get into. Did one, portion of the one station of a sprinkler system go on more than 15 minutes, and did it go on twice a week? I mean, how do you do things like that? I think where we ultimately need to go, and before too long, is looking at a tiered rate system.
They found, though, in so many instances, that when you do these things, that you get a very high percentage of people complying. They just want to do the right thing. You have some people who it doesn't matter. You can charge them whatever. We found that during the last drought. You're charging more? I don't care. I got plenty of money. I'm just going to run my lawn irrigated the way I want to. But I agree. I think it's a twofold approach. But I don't think we should overlook the fact that we will get some results from this. I just had a question. Pool covers. I was astounded by the amount of water you said we lost through evaporation at the reservoir before we covered it. Now, obviously, a pool isn't that big, but still, is there any program to help homeowners buy pool covers?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't see any incentive.
Okay, that's something you should think about.
Yeah. Well, getting back to Councilmember Henn's question, because I think that's a really important one. 10% of what? And this is why we kept struggling with, as Homer said, the tiered rate. Tiered rates are based on an allocation, so we look at a home that has X amount of people and a square footage, and we allow them so much water, and anything they use over that in excess, they pay a higher rate. That money that you collect in the higher rate, in turn, goes to pay for the penalties should we have to buy the water from Met or we exceed our allocation. Great plan. It takes a while to implement. We still want to move in that direction. Looking at, and Councilmember Gardner is correct too, is as we say you can't wash off the sidewalks and we have some enforcement behind that, there are customers. We have seen already a reduction of 7% citywide. This is the first time I've ever seen it. Historically, we always see more and more usage every year, but this year we're seeing 7%, just I think what they hear on the news and what people are starting to get the picture that we're running out of water. So I think that would help as well. I think the goal here is to develop an ordinance. One is to update it, which I stated earlier. Two is, if there are these financial incentives that do become available, I think that, my opinion would be is to try to implement some of these measures that are required by agencies in case funding is available. And then the next method would be is to look at something like a tiered rate structure in the future to collect or to get that water if customers do waste water.
What is the timeline to develop a tiered rate structure?
We're ready to move forward. I think, the first step was we brought the rate itself, which we hope to bring to you next month. And then the next, we're really close. I think that the problem may be, and these are probably another study session item, is to talk about the cost to implement a tiered rate. We're looking at monthly billing and, monthly reading, the implementation to actually put out the notice and change the bill a little bit. And our billing system needs a little bit of work. So, I said a year, worst case. We could shorten that up if we needed to rush it forward. we're ready to bring a presentation to the council.
I was kind of noticing that about the meter reading. Do we currently do that with people, or do we have a
Yeah.
technology system?
No, it's half, well, the commercial meters are done technology with electronic meter reading, and then those are for the meters that are out in the middle of the intersections.
There is technology to where they plug in the usage and it
Right.
automatically goes, into the office, so.
For the big
way
accounts.
it's
Right. In terms of
conveyed.
best practices, where's the city of Newport Beach as far as region-wide with having people read meters?
Well, without getting too far away from this subject, we actually did a study on was it feasible to do electronic meter reading, and I was looking at a cost of about $8 million to implement an electronic meter reading system, and it was really not feasible compared to what it would take for somebody to read it. To get us to monthly billing, just to give you an example, for about $100,000, we could go to monthly billing by contracting out half the city, and I got proposals, and I already looked at that. And so but it would be an ongoing cost of $100,000. But if you look at the payback of that versus, and the full-time staff, $200,000, you could do that for quite a while before you spend $8 million and have to replace the system again, so.
I would see kind of efficiencies, just really simple stuff like, for example, my water bill is paid, you deduct it through my bank account, and $30, $40 a month disappears, or whatever it is. And then in the mail, I get some kind of paperwork about what the bill is. And yet, through our paycheck at the city, we're now getting an email. So,
Right.
That takes time to prepare that bill, put it in the mail, and send it to me, and then I pick it up out of the mail, and it's like, oh, my water bill,
Right.
So I would just see efficiencies with that.
And there's definitely opportunities out there. We looked at another billing system that some of the other agencies are looking that are much more efficient. But those things, again, cost money to do, and we'd be happy to bring that forward to you guys to look at and decide.
With the proposed rate increases, it seems that in the next couple of years that we're going to soften the blow through taking from the reserves. So
Right.
there's not going to be a big increase. So it's kind of like, is there then a big hurry to implement that new rate instead of maybe looking at a tiered system, which is going to be based more on water usage? I mean, the concern that I have about the rates is that you're paying a connection charge, and my water usage may be the same or less, yet I'm paying a whole lot more than someone whose water usage may be substantially more, but because of this, how the connection charge plays into it.
Yeah, well, that, in regards to the rates, that is what some of the things we were trying to adjust, was that the fixed fee, the price for the meter, is such a small portion now that we would raise that to hopefully recover some of the operation and maintenance costs, the electricity and the chemicals and such to operate the system. The tiered rate portion would be only applied to the commodity, the actual variable rate, the amount for the cost of water. So even if we establish the rate structure that we've proposed, and we came back later and said we wanted to tier that variable rate, the actual cost, it could fit nicely in there. We've already gone backwards and said this is going to pay for our CIP infrastructure in the future, and we've already addressed those issues now. So we see it kind of instead of just stacking everything in front of you in one meeting, let's try to establish a meter charge, a CIP charge, and not rate shock the customers is what we're recommending, but draw off a little bit of reserves. Even if we implement a tiered rate, it would just be for that one section. So we're not all of a sudden going to increase the rates. We're just going to take over that amount of money that we collect from the commodity and tier it. Again, back to Councilmember Hinn's question on the percentage of what. The problem with that percentage of what is the person that conserves water is we ask them to cut back by 10 or 11% in the stage. They see the next door neighbor that's been wasting the water, and we ask them to cut back 10 or 11%. It's easy. All they do is shut off the garden hose, they don't let it run down the gutter. And so, whereas the person that's conserving. So it is problematic. It is, I put this in front of you as, we have to do something. We have no way to police that unless we do set up allocations, which would be the tiered rate system.
Yeah, so George, first off, I think this is a very nice effort to simplify something that could otherwise
Very
be
complicated.
daunting, and so I applaud you on that. And it's in response to the comments you just made, I think what will be very important is that you define an efficient, responsive appeal system for people that do have unusual circumstances. It doesn't take a lot of time to exercise your mind about reasonable appeal situations. And I'll just give you another one. I first bought my home in Newport Beach as a second home, as a beach house that got used, sporadically, intermittently through the year, and then it became my permanent home. Wow, that's a big change in the demand curve for that home that would be unfair to be penalized for. So that's just one example. There's lots of examples, and it's going to put pressure on you to have a very good appeal system.
Yeah, and I think, I was not in this position in the 1990s, but I understand that in 1990s when they first implemented a reduction or started into rationing, if you recall back then, folks were painting their yards green in L.A. because there just wasn't any water. We were getting 1,000 calls a day the first day that we went into it, and for that very reason. The draft ordinance that we want to bring to you is got two things about it. It's called relief of compliance, and this is when we enter into these levels. There are exceptions. We understand there's hospitals and medical facilities and folks on dialysis. We know that. Those would be established, we thought, at the department level, that there would be a system that people could come in and ask for relief of compliance on these permanent restrictions, and even the 10 or 11% on circumstances. As far as enforcement, this is another policy decision for you. When you go to enforce, so if people don't do it, there are two methods to do it. The current ordinance looks at, if you don't comply, then we're going to charge X amount per 100 cubic foot. So it's a rate-based penalty. When you go that direction, then it falls under the Prop 218. We can certainly do that. We issue a Prop 218 notice. People submit a protest vote. We wait 45 days. The other way is to just simply do it with a municipal code violation. The advantage to this would be is if they're issued a warning initially, and then they fall under the typical municipal code infraction, at that point, then the resident or the customer could then file through the appeals process that we currently have through the city attorney's office. So I'm taken out of the picture. Our department's taken out. The city attorney looks at that and says, well, it's just not fair. So you have two entities that are policing this. And so in our draft ordinance, we recommend going through that route without going through the Prop 218 proceedings to enforce this. So again, is your decision.
Just one last comment. In reading the draft of the ordinance, I didn't see in there where we treated mandated construction site watering requirements. Maybe I missed it, but I didn't see it. I mean, we routinely require contractors to water down construction sites.
Yeah, we actually did, and I apologize for that last draft. I think that's why we pulled it at the last minute. We had a little bit of issues with some of the clarity there. We have a better version of that, which we want to bring to you. But yes, we do. We actually, in any construction site where there's reclaimed water that's available, we require them to use recycled water. You are not allowed to just connect to fire hydrants. It's metered. But there are restrictions on construction sites on the amount of water that can't run off the property. They're only allowed X amount of gallons. So we had to get our hands around that. We don't see a lot of that type of construction where they're standing out there with a fire hose, but I suppose it could happen, but we did address it in the new draft.
Also, penalties would tend to be for the more egregious violations, I'm assuming. I mean,
Of
as
course.
far as if we went through a municipal code violation, that the occasional mishap would not necessarily be penalized. It would be the person that has been perhaps warned, has been
Right.
told not to do it, and continues to do it.
Yeah, in this system, what we did is we wanted to issue a warning, which is a little bit, you asked why the brown on the sheet, is we were a little bit more lenient here. We said, well, we'll create some permanent restrictions, and for a couple of reasons. We know that the coastal bay and ocean water quality is important to you and the residents here. And so we wanted to attack some of the runoff issues right away because we could cover kill two birds with one stone. So we incorporated those into the permanent restrictions and stayed consistent with all the other ordinances we have. So with that said, once we go into a level shortage warning, or we see, for instance, a broken sprinkler, and rather than just go out there and give them a municipal code violation, we would issue a warning. We didn't see warnings in any of the other code or other ordinances that we looked at in developing ours, so we want to issue the resident a warning. Please fix that sprinkler. We see it shooting out and across the street. It's been 3 or 4 days. And we would slowly take on a more aggressive, as you know, the existing municipal code is the $100, $200, and $500, but we would start off with a warning. And I think most people, once they're aware of it, they would go out and repair it. So the idea isn't to develop this to gain revenue. It's just we needed some mechanism to be able to enforce it. And so the existing municipal code is there, but it would start off with a warning. So some of the, I guess the best we could do is, like you say, with this matrix, I know it's a lot, it's really confusing. We added a fourth level, which is outside the Met ordinance. And we just wanted to be able to come to you at that time. We would observe how much water we have available, how much we need to reduce, and we would be asking council to adopt by resolution the next level. The fourth one is not part of the Met ordinance, but you can see that we say, when you say no watering or irrigating, there of course is some exceptions to that. But this is that extreme circumstance that half of our water is not available and we really need to shut down. And I think this is something we saw maybe in the late 80s or 90s. We don't anticipate to get there, but we saw in the Met model ordinance and other ordinances that level coming sooner where they just said no more watering. And so we tried to smooth that out a little bit.
So do you have levels in mind that would trigger the reduction, sort of a percentage or something that would, of water supply that would trigger these levels at this point? Or is this just something that would be sort of play it by ear and would come when you say, I think this is level 2 or 3?
Yeah, exactly. And, I should have put in level 1, but level 2 and 3, you can see when we ask for, we're looking at a supply issue of 0 to 10%, which would be level 1.
Oh, so the same as the reduction?
Correct.
We would look at that.
And that's why we wanted to put that triggering mark in there and ask or require residents to cut back. So if we have a supply shortage of 11%, then we're asking the customers to cut back by 11%. And so those would be the trigger marks.
And George, would the city council determine when we go from level 1 to level 2 or level 2 to level 3?
Right. Well, the utilities department or the director would bring to you the water supply situation and then a resolution that asking you to adopt the next level. And it would have to go the same way. Is that if there is a supply, I would bring to you then the water situation and say, hey, look, it's been raining for 3 months. Can we go back to level 1? And then we would do it by resolution the other way. So it stays in effect until you decide otherwise. So on these, I don't know if you have any, probably it's a lot to absorb in one evening, but do you have any questions about the Met ordinance or the BMP compliance issues? These are those colors that are in there, the requirements to comply. There's some legal issues and funding opportunities there. But again, I have Carl here to answer any of the questions about funding or why.
Well, I guess one thing would be interesting to me is to know where the brown items come from. If fountains and pools once a week, if that comes from Met, and if something else comes from another agency, where those ideas came from.
Well, some of the ideas that are a shift from where the fountains and pools are in level 1 here in our proposed ordinance, in the Met ordinance was perhaps in level 2, and we moved it, and there's a reason we shifted it around. We weren't as stringent with the brown items, say, for instance, level 1, watering limited to 3 days a week. We went to 4 days a week. And that was because we looked at other folks' ordinances and, again, added that fourth level. And we felt that if at just a 10% reduction, which is what we're currently at now, we felt we would go 4 days, 3 days, 1 day, and then nothing. And we were trying to just clean it up and make a little bit more sense. And so because we add that fourth level, we actually changed it from 3 days to 4 days. So to answer your question, Mayor Selch, really some of those were staff's recommendations. Some of them are from looking at other ordinances and just in comments that we received from the Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee as well. But we've shifted these around to kind of fit within our existing ordinance and to match up to what we already have.
I would say that, of course, you'd all expect me to say this wrongly, but that the permanent restrictions are very reasonable. I don't see anything that's really onerous. And the others are only triggered by the fact of real shortages. And even there, I think we've been trying to provide some flexibility. The Coastal Bay Water Quality Committee was very supportive. And as you say, we do kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We get the water runoff reduction as well as some conservation.
Well, if you recall, there was also another meeting, we had the Green Building Committee, right, or the Green Task Force, sorry.
How would you answer, though, and this is an issue that has come up every time, particularly, I think, in more in the environmental areas, but not necessarily strictly there, that we are saving water, but we don't have a water program for the state, that what we're doing is, those of us who save water in Newport Beach are simply providing some extra water so that there can be growth in South County or something. How do we answer that question? Because I've had a lot of people, I've had environmentalists say, hey, use all you can. Use it up, because that will stop growth that we don't want. Well, you know,
Well, and that's interesting, because we're faced with that now. As you know, we're doing a water supply assessment for the Banning Ranch. And before those little studies took, you know, $10,000 or $15,000 to do a study, are costing thousands of dollars, because on the water supply assessments, we're not just looking at the local supplies and connections and how big the pipes are. They're looking at regionally. How are you going to supply water to this area because of the water shortage coming up? And they have to answer those questions. And so, you know, that's a great question on how do we do that. What is our forecast in the future? Will we have enough water to supply? We may have the infrastructure, but we may not have the water. So I think those issues are getting more and more complicated, but currently there is no legislation that restricts it. You'll see in the conservation ordinance, some people are adopting that after you get to a certain level, no new meters, no new construction, and you'll see a lot of those. The new landscape ordinance is another one that's coming down the pipe that we'll see that for irrigation systems that you won't be able to add them in, you know, if X amount without certain restrictions.
Well, how are we going to enforce all this? Are we going to hire more enforcement people, or are we going to take people off of enforcing things they're enforcing now and say this is more important and you enforce these things? And then I look at it and say, well, you know, how are we going to enforce, you know, what people do at night, watering and doing things? I mean, are we going to have, you know, enforcement people out at night looking for violations? I mean, how are we going to do all this?
No, and you're right, and we won't. We won't send people out in the middle of the night. I mean, it's, you know, obviously, if you would like us to, we will, but
really.
we won't. I mean, we're not looking. Some of and back to the two birds with one stone again. You know, on some of those permit restrictions in the Brown, because I did want to finally answer your question on that, like the commercial kitchen requirements and the laundry facilities. These are ones that are coming down to us from the Green Building Code as well. So we see that we already see this. The Green Task Force asked us to look at that, and we put this in here too, because in the water conservation ordinance, you want to make sure that people that are building new laundry facilities are putting in high-efficiency washers.
Is that our local committee or some statewide committee?
That it's
our local committee? Both.
Yeah. But in January, I believe it's in January, Councilmember Gardner probably knows.
So, you know, you're going to both of Councilwoman Gardner's committees. You need to come to like the Aviation Committee.
Yeah, we got them all. But so we're trying to incorporate that to keep consistent. How are we going to enforce it? You know, that's difficult. You're right. I mean, we could have neighbors calling neighbors, but you know, we want to get our guys are going to be out there. We don't want to encourage people to run around with their cars and try to, you know, call the police on
well, that's where the tiered rates eventually will also help a lot.
That's what we anticipate.
We're not looking at adding any staff people as far as enforcement, and you're absolutely right, Mr. Mayor, because, I mean, we all know a lot of properties, the backyard probably uses 75% of the water. And there's no way that we're going to be able to enforce, you know, these permanent measures just because of backyard and because you're not going to go there and you don't know what's going to happen. So it seems like all roads kind of lead to the tiered rate system in order to help us.
So I know it's a lot to absorb here, but I guess what we're asking is this is the direction that we were looking at going to be able to comply with the funding opportunities that are out there, to be able to put something, to update the existing ordinance, to be able to hopefully meet our allocations for this fiscal year and the coming year. The next plan, of course, would be to establish our rates, stop the hemorrhaging of the water that's going, you know, we're paying twice as much for water this year as we did last year. And then bring to you a discussion for the tiered rates. That's the only real way to collect the monies to pay the penalties should we get in that direction. But I think everyone in California is going to have to at least stop the wasting of water. I keep saying that. And we're not just telling people don't brush your teeth anymore, don't take baths, but the wasting of water. And we see that there are many opportunities out there that residents can just at least conserve the water that they have. It's changing. The water is just not available, and we had an abundant source of water for 100 years here. And so, as you see, district by district, they're adopting these ordinances and trying to put them in place. So,
It'll be like gasoline. When gasoline went up, people quit driving so much and went to more efficient cars. Same thing will happen with water.
exactly.
Can you remind me again, why are we suggesting the level 4? Because it's not in the Met recommended or required. So why are we putting that in our ordinance again?
Well, it was actually, if you see it in level 3, the black, no watering or irrigating without certain exceptions. The Met recommendation, the Met model ordinance, and again, we don't have to follow them. This is looking at, that was just an example, is that they, at level 3, the severe shortage, no watering, and they had the same exceptions. We just said no watering, and this is, I'm sorry, it says 1 day, but it just means, just the outside irrigation of your plants and vegetation down to 1 day. And then, so, like, again, to stay consistent, level 1 would be 4 days, 3 days in level 2, 1 day in level 3, and then a final, a level 4. So again, I just spread it out.
So it was just a way to get to where you would have no days of watering?
Right, which in the Met model ordinance is already in level 3, the severe.
Okay. So we've softened up level 3 that the Met wanted,
Correct.
but in return, we had to come up with a level 4 to actually hit what level 3 was doing under the Met ordinance.
Correct, yeah.
Is
And
that right?
try to smooth it out a little bit.
Yeah, I think the correct way to read this chart is that where there is a brown ink discrepancy with the black ink, staff is going to be proposing the brown ink version
Yes.
here in the
Yeah.
ordinance. Right.
Yeah, and the black is going away. Those, I'm sorry, the black is actually, it's in there. We're not recommending the black section. That's actually a recommendation, not required, and we won't be recommending the black.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Let's look at level 3, for example. It says fix leaks within 24 hours. Is that going to be in the ordinance you send us?
Well, we actually recommend early on. In the permanent restriction is a fixed leak within 7 days. In level 1, we're asking 72 hours. Actually, we don't have, I'm sorry, we just say in level 1, fixed leak within 72 hours was the Met recommendation. We're requiring them immediately to fix leaks. We could put a time to that, but we think that that's important and early on in the stages to repair the leaks. We didn't put a 24 or 48.
Oh, I see. So none of the black language will be in the ordinance that you send us?
Yeah, I'm sorry, on this part, the watering limited to 3 days, we keep the words watering limited to 4 days, so I keep some of the words there. But,
So where there's just black, that would be there as it is, but where there's black with brown, it would be the black and brown
correct.
combination.
Yeah, that's correct.
But under permanent restrictions, all of these are going to be in the permanent restrictions?
That is correct.
Okay.
Because there's no blank there. I think probably where we are is now to move forward with the ordinance and come back. Maybe we can even have another study session so that you can see how it looks in ordinance format. Because it is a little complicated and confusing in looking at it this way.
Well, there was some mention that there was some penalty if we didn't do this by a certain time. Is that not critical anymore?
Now, the funding opportunities were for Met, were to be adopted by July 1.
It wasn't a
It's not a
fine penalty. It was that maybe you wouldn't be
Right.
eligible for some funding.
And Carl can probably speak to this, but since there is no funding available right now, we're really not being penalized when we're not after any funds. As soon as we adopt this ordinance, those funds will be available again. It's important that we get something on board to comply with the best management practices, because as you know, the urban water management plan will be due in the year 2010. It's due every 5 years. The last one was 2005, so we're gearing up to do that. The urban water management plan, of course, is important for development, and it's a state requirement, so we'll have to address that soon.
I don't know if this is the time for the discussion, but maybe when you come back, just what are we doing as far as like obtaining more reclaimed water and using that for maybe some of the larger users in town that are currently using, potable water?
Well-
Where we could, it'd be an easy, like a, I don't know, like the cemetery, let's say.
Yeah.
They're not using reclaimed water over there, are they?
No, and actually IRWD approached us last year about that, and there's a health risk to irrigating. The cemetery, at Pacific View Cemetery in Corona del Mar, is right above our finished potable water, and the State Health Department won't allow it at the cemetery. For an example, there are 2 parks, if you adopt the budget this evening, that are being converted to recycle. And that's the Bonita Creek Sports Park, which was originally designed in the 1980s for reclaim, but we just never converted it. We brought that up to date. That's ready to go under construction. That can go in a month. It'll be done. The East Bluff Park, which is what we asked for in our CIP project, a CIP process, is to convert East Bluff Park. So you're totally correct. We're converting every one that we can where it's available. It's not financially feasible, we think. It may be your decision, but when you bring a water line down San Joaquin for $2 or $3, $4 million right now to introduce reclaim to other parts of the city doesn't seem a good year to do that, but that may be a decision in the future if we want to expand that.
Yeah, certainly. I would imagine water rates are not going to drop over the long run. I mean, so at some point we're going to have to look at that, the alternatives.
And Councilmember Gardner has asked about bringing some of the Poseidon details back to her and her committee as well, and I'd be happy to share that. So I think that's something that you need to make a decision on as a policy. What is that a viable alternate source of water in the future?
The desal and Huntington Beach you're talking about?
Yeah, right.
Is that do they have any plan to bring that through our city?
It won't be through our city, but what they'll do is supply water to the Metropolitan Water District, and so ultimately we'll be buying that water. But they're looking for participants now, and so again, I'm not prepared to present on that at this point. But
There are a lot of issues with that
there's a
too,
lot
so it
of
would make a
issues.
very interesting
Yeah.
presentation.
So.
Thank you,
So,
George.
With your permission, I can make Carl available if you have any questions for him, or if not, then perhaps, like Homer said, we can bring a ordinance. Oh, Carl, do you want to?
I'm really here as backup to staff today, but we are appreciative of your efforts in water use efficiency, and particularly on the runoff issues. We think there's a nice linkage in there. On the Poseidon issue, we are actually working with a group of agencies right now, so we can coordinate with George on that and help bring back information. The agencies we're working with are trying to basically break up the black box formula that Poseidon's using so we can better understand what the implications are of the project and how to get involved in the project and what are the implications of the project, so that an informed decision can be made about whether we should go forward with it or not. So we'd offer our assistance in that as well.
What's the status of that Poseidon project? Has that been through the Coastal Commission yet or anything?
It has not received final Coastal Commission permit. It did receive, completed the environmental documentation through the City of Huntington Beach. Essentially, right now, they don't have any customers, and that's the concept of them working with the 10 agencies collectively in San Diego County. I don't know if you're familiar with what went on down there, but Poseidon sort of did an end run around the entities they were dealing with directly. So we took the issue head on here and said, let's get a group of 10 agencies together. We entered into an MOU with Poseidon, which prevents them or us from going around one another. We have to deal with one another directly, and we're not allowed to go to the press. They're not allowed to go around and talk to our directors and that sort of thing without our consent and permission. So it's a better way of conducting business in the upfront aspects of the negotiations until the terms and conditions are better understood. And that's essentially what we're trying to do right now. Poseidon has been paying for consultants that are made available to our side of things to better understand their business model and how we would be involved in that business model. We'll also tackle some of the technical issues and some of the environmental issues associated with that project in that process.
Okay, but the one in San Diego did get approved, though, correct?
The one in San Diego, my understanding is it did receive all the permitting requirements. They're, I think, putting the final touches on that, but they're essentially putting their financing package together now, and then we'll begin moving forward with that.
Councilman Webb?
There's one question that perhaps all the council members don't fully understand. We have a number of different agencies that three agencies involved here that we've talked about: Metropolitan, MoDOC, Orange County Water District. And all three of those agencies are not in the same line, so to speak, that we end up buying water. Could you just briefly try to explain to us the difference between Metropolitan, where MoDOC fits in the line between us and Metropolitan, and then how the Orange County Water District fits in there?
Yeah, the easiest way to look at it is your local groundwater resources are all managed by Orange County Water District. We're MoDOC, Municipal Water District of Orange County, is on the imported side of it. That included, until 2 years ago, imported water being brought into the county for groundwater replenishment purposes. So we work very closely with Orange County Water District. We also have worked with them to get funding for GWRS and other conjunctive use programs in the county that involve Metropolitan. In essence, you could view us as your representatives at Metropolitan. While we don't control everything that goes on at Metropolitan, we try to influence what does go on. Our agency appoints 4 board members that sit on the Metropolitan board, and we try to compete among the Met family to get as good a deal as we can for Orange County in that arena. And so that's essentially what our job and our role is, and that's why sometimes you'll hear that Met has done A, B, and C, but when it gets down here to Orange County, it comes out a little different. An example being for the penalty provisions of being over your allocation. The way Metropolitan looks at that, they gave MoDOC an allocation. We took that and have allocated that down to all of our agencies. But at the same time, we did a pooled concept where if we have some agencies over the allocation and other agencies under the allocation, our board has made a determination as long as we, MoDOC, do not incur a penalty from Metropolitan, we will not pass one through. So some of those regional alliances provide another level of protection for the local agencies, and so that's a benefit in being in that membership and also having us work collectively with Orange County Water District on some of those issues. So there can be differences and nuances as those programs are passed through from Metropolitan into Orange County. We try to make them a little more flexible. The other Metropolitan member agencies in Orange County are Anaheim, Fullerton, Santa Ana. We also try to coordinate with those 3 agencies to make sure that policies and programs are passed through on a consistent basis in Orange County.
To kind of oversimplify it, when we draw water out of the groundwater basin, we send a check to Orange County Water District. When we buy Metropolitan water, we send a check to MoDOC.
Okay, any other questions, George, comments? Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Okay, any public comments on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll adjourn to closed session. Well, any public comments on non-agenda items? Okay, go into closed session.